Could one of Africa's poorest nations be quietly discovering a new way to create wealth without finding a single new gold mine? For decades, the world's economic map seemed almost impossible to change. African nations exported raw materials. Others refined them, branded them, and sold them back to the world at far higher prices. Cotton left as cotton, mangoes left as fruit, sesame left as seed. The value was created somewhere else, while millions of hard-working Africans watched opportunity cross their borders one truck at a time. But today, something different is beginning to unfold in Burkina Faso. This is no longer only a story about agriculture. It is not only about harvests, factories, or government reforms. It is about a nation asking a question that could reshape how Africa thinks about prosperity itself. What if real wealth is not hidden beneath the ground? What if it is created by what a country chooses to build before anything leaves its borders? If this story matters to you and you believe Africa deserves the chance to create more of its own prosperity, press, like now, subscribe for clear Africa news, and stay with us until the end. Because what you are about to hear is not just Burkina Faso's story. It may become one of Africa's defining economic turning points just outside Bobo Dioulasso, as the first light of morning touches the fields. An elderly farmer watches his grandson prepare for another day's work. The grandfather remembers a lifetime of growing crops that disappeared onto trucks bound for distant ports. Year after year, the harvest left. The profits rarely stayed. His grandson sees the same fields differently. He no longer dreams only of producing more crops. He dreams of processing them, packaging them, selling finished products, creating local jobs, and building businesses that carry the words "Made in Burkina Faso." That difference between two generations is larger than it first appears. It represents a quiet revolution in the way an entire nation may be beginning to define success. Across Burkina Faso, conversations are slowly changing. Farmers speak not only about yields, but about value. Young engineers discuss food processing instead of simply exporting raw produce. Entrepreneurs talk about local factories instead of waiting for foreign buyers. Students debate how knowledge, manufacturing, and innovation can become the country's next natural resources. This new conversation reaches far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, from Ghana to Mali, from Niger to Senegal. Many Africans are asking a similar question. If one country can keep more value at home, why can't the rest of Africa? That question has captured the attention of economists, business leaders, and ordinary citizens alike, because history shows that nations rarely become prosperous simply by exporting what nature gives them. They grow stronger when they transform those resources into products, industries, skills, and opportunities that remain within their own economies. This is the reform agenda that many supporters believe Burkina Faso is trying to build, not merely producing more, but producing differently. Supporters see it as an effort to strengthen local industries, encourage domestic processing, invest in human capital, and expand regional trade so that a greater share of economic value stays inside the country. Whether every goal will be achieved remains uncertain, but the ambition itself has already started a wider conversation across the continent. And perhaps that is the most important change of all. Because revolutions do not always begin with loud speeches. Sometimes they begin with a simple change in the way people think. And in Burkina Faso, that change may already be underway. But changing the way people think is far easier than transforming an entire economy. So how did Burkina Faso begin turning one bold idea into what some hope could become a new model of African prosperity? The answer begins not in a government office, but in the fields. Workshops and factories where value is being imagined in an entirely different way. For generations, many countries across Africa measured success by one simple number: how much they could produce. The more cotton harvested, the better. The more sesame exported, the stronger the economy. The more livestock sold across the border, the greater the achievement. Yet, beneath those impressive export figures, another reality quietly unfolded. Much of the real value, the refining, the manufacturing, the branding, and the profits was often created somewhere else. Supporters of Burkina Faso's current reform agenda argue that this is precisely the cycle the country is trying to break. Instead of asking, how can we export more? The new question becomes, how can we create more value before anything leaves Burkina Faso? That difference may sound small. In reality, it changes everything. Imagine two trucks leaving the same village. The first carries raw cotton. The second carries finished clothing produced by local workers. Both trucks leave with products from the same fields, but only one carries thousands of additional hours of African labor. Only one supports local factories. Only one creates engineering jobs, packaging companies, transport services, designers, accountants, and new entrepreneur. Suddenly, agriculture is no longer only feeding people. It begins feeding an entire industrial ecosystem. That is why many economists describe value addition, not simply production, as one of the most important foundations of long-term economic development inside Burkina Faso. This way of thinking is beginning to appear in conversations far beyond government offices. At a vocational training center outside Ouagadougou, young mechanics no longer discuss only repairing imported equipment. Many speak about designing tools better suited to local conditions. Nearby, food science students imagine processing local fruit into juices, dried foods, and packaged products instead of watching fresh harvests leave the country with little added value. A young entrepreneur smiles as she explains her dream. My parents sold tomatoes. I want to build the factory that sells tomato products. That sentence captures something larger than business. It captures confidence. Across many villages, similar conversations are quietly emerging. Farmers still care about rainfall. They still worry about markets. But increasingly, they also ask another question. Who earns the most after the harvest? For decades, that answer was rarely the farmer. Now, supporters of reform hope the answer can gradually change. This shift is not simply economic, it is psychological. People begin to see themselves not only as producers of raw materials, but as creators of finished value. History suggests that this change in mindset often comes before major economic transformation. Countries that successfully expanded manufacturing and domestic industries did not begin with factories alone. They began with people believing they could build them. That belief may prove to be one of Burkina Faso's most valuable resources. As these conversations spread, another remarkable change begins to appear. Young Africans are paying attention. In Ghana, a university student studying agricultural economics follows discussions about food processing in the Sahel. He asks a simple question. If they can keep more value at home, why are we still exporting so much in raw form? In Mali, members of a farming cooperative discuss whether regional partnerships could help neighboring countries process crops closer to where they are grown. In Senegal, a small business owner imagines supplying packaging materials instead of importing finished products. These are only individual voices. Yet together they hint at something larger. The conversation is slowly moving beyond national borders. It is becoming continental. Many Africans are no longer debating only how to increase production. They are asking how Africa can capture a larger share of the value it already creates. That question represents one of the most important economic conversations taking place across the continent today. Supporters believe Burkina Faso is helping amplify that discussion. Critics point out that transforming an economy is never simple. They remind observers that building processing industries requires reliable electricity, transportation networks, financing, skilled workers, competitive businesses, and consistent policies. Those challenges are real. No country overcomes them overnight. But every long journey begins by choosing a direction. And perhaps that is exactly what makes Burkina Faso's reform agenda noteworthy. It is attempting to redefine the destination itself. Instead of measuring success only by exports, the broader ambition appears to focus on strengthening domestic production, encouraging local enterprise, and developing human capabilities alongside agriculture. The fields remain important, but increasingly, attention turns toward what happens after the harvest. This is where the story becomes even more compelling. Drive through farming communities during harvest season, and another pattern begins to emerge. The trucks still leave, but people increasingly ask what should happen before they do. Could local mills process more grain? Could local businesses package more food? Could young engineers design equipment suited to local farms? Could African companies build stronger regional supply chains? Each question leads naturally to another. Each answer creates another opportunity. One cooperative leader explains it this way: when our children leave the village, we want them to leave because they choose new opportunities, not because they have no opportunities here. That simple statement reveals the human side of economic reform. It is not only about gross domestic product. It is about giving young people reasons to believe they can build successful lives without abandoning their communities. Hope itself becomes an economic asset. And hope can spread remarkably fast across social media. African students increasingly discuss entrepreneurship instead of dependency. Young engineers exchange ideas about irrigation, renewable energy, food preservation, logistics, and agricultural technology. Business owners explore regional markets that once seemed too difficult to reach. While every country faces its own circumstances, a common theme begins to emerge. Africa does not lack resources. Many believe its greatest challenge has been capturing enough value from those resources. If that perception continues changing, the long-term consequences could extend far beyond one nation. Supporters imagine stronger regional trade, growing manufacturing sectors, more skilled employment, greater food processing capacity, expanded cooperation between neighboring economies. None of these outcomes are guaranteed. Each depends on sustained investment, effective governance, education, infrastructure, and market conditions. But the conversation itself signals a different mindset. Rather than asking who will invest in Africa, more people are asking what Africa can build for itself. Perhaps that is the quiet revolution taking shape, not a revolution of slogans, not a revolution of dramatic speeches, a revolution of economic imagination. And once people begin imagining a different future, expectations start changing. Communities demand more. Students prepare differently. Businesses invest differently. Governments face new expectations. The momentum slowly builds. Yet every transformation eventually reaches an important test. Creating value inside one country is one challenge. Expanding that value across an entire region is another. If Burkina Faso hopes to keep more prosperity at home, it cannot stand alone forever. It will need stronger partnerships, deeper regional markets, and growing confidence among African consumers themselves. That raises the next and perhaps most fascinating question of all. Could a new generation of African trade become the engine that transforms local ambition into continental prosperity? The next chapter of Burkina Faso's story may not be written in its ministries or conference halls. It may be written where trade routes begin, every morning, long before sunrise. Trucks leave villages carrying the work of thousands of families. For years, those journeys often marked the end of the economic story. Raw products crossed borders, while most of the processing, branding, and higher value activities took place elsewhere. But supporters of Burkina Faso's reform agenda hope those journeys can begin telling a different story. Instead of exporting opportunity, they envision exporting products with more African value already built into them. If that vision continues to develop, the implications extend well beyond Burkina Faso. Imagine a truck carrying processed tomato products to Mali, another transporting packaged sesame oil to Niger, another delivering finished cotton textiles to Ghana, another supplying food products to Côte d'Ivoire. Each border crossed would represent more than trade. It would represent African businesses buying from African businesses, African workers creating jobs for African families, African entrepreneurs solving African challenges. For decades, economists have spoken about regional integration. Perhaps its greatest meaning is not found in official agreements, but in ordinary commerce that allows neighboring communities to prosper together. In a busy market near the border, one trader reflects on the changes she hopes to see. My father crossed borders looking for customers. Maybe my children will cross them looking for partners. That single word, partners, captures an important shift, not dependency, not competition alone, partnership across the continent. Similar conversations are becoming more common. Young business owners discuss regional supply chains. Technology developers explore digital payment systems that connect neighboring markets. Agricultural cooperatives exchange ideas about storage, transportation, and food processing. Many of these initiatives remain small. Some may never grow beyond local success. Others could become the building blocks of something much larger. History often begins quietly. The greatest transformations rarely announce themselves on the first day. They gather momentum, one decision at a time, one partnership at a time, one successful business at a time. Yet every economic transformation ultimately depends on people. Factories can be built, roads can be paved, warehouses can be expanded, but without skilled citizens, no long-term development strategy can succeed. That is why many observers believe the next stage of Burkina Faso's journey may depend just as much on education and human capital as on agriculture itself. Across technical schools, young students learn mechanical engineering, food science, renewable energy, construction, and business management. Supporters argue that these investments matter because natural resources eventually run out. Knowledge does not. A teacher in Ouagadougou tells his students something they never forget. Your greatest export should never be your brightest young people. The classroom falls silent because everyone understands the meaning. For too many years, talented young Africans believed opportunity existed somewhere else. Europe, North America, the Gulf. Leaving home often felt like the only path toward success. Today, another possibility is slowly entering the conversation. What if opportunity could increasingly be created at home? What if innovation could grow beside the very fields that once supplied only raw materials? What if engineering laboratories, food processing facilities, logistics companies, technology startups, and manufacturing workshops became just as important as mines and farms? No one can predict exactly how quickly such a transformation could unfold. Every country faces different economic realities. Every reform encounters obstacles. Infrastructure must improve. Investment must continue. Markets must remain competitive. Policies must adapt over time. Yet, one lesson appears repeatedly throughout economic history. Lasting prosperity often begins when people stop asking what they can extract from their country and begin asking what they can build within it. That question may become one of the defining ideas shaping Burkina Faso's future, and perhaps Africa's future as well. Across the continent, many citizens are watching carefully, not because they expect Burkina Faso to provide every answer, but because they see one nation attempting to ask different questions. How do we keep more value? How do we strengthen local industries? How do we prepare young people for tomorrow instead of yesterday? How do we transform resources into lasting prosperity? Whether those ambitions succeed will depend on years of determined effort, but the conversation itself has already become meaningful. A young entrepreneur in Senegal follows developments with curiosity. A cooperative leader in Mali wonders how regional partnerships might expand. A university student in Ghana studies examples of local manufacturing. An engineer in Niger imagines machinery designed specifically for Sahel conditions. These people may never meet, yet they are connected by a common belief. Africa's future does not have to follow yesterday's blueprint. It can create its own. That idea carries enormous emotional weight because for generations, too many discussions about Africa focused almost entirely on what the continent lacked. Today, more conversations begin with a different question. What strengths already exist and how can they create lasting prosperity? Perhaps that is the quiet awakening taking place, not an awakening built on confrontation, but on confidence. Confidence that African knowledge matters, African businesses matter, African workers matter, African innovation matters, and above all, African people matter. Burkina Faso alone cannot transform an entire continent. No single nation can, but history reminds us that meaningful change often begins with one example that encourages others to imagine new possibilities. Whether Burkina Faso ultimately becomes such an example remains to be seen. The future will depend on consistent reforms, resilient institutions, productive partnerships, and the determination of millions of ordinary citizens. Yet one truth already seems clear. A nation changes long before statistics reveal it. It changes when its people begin believing they are capable of building something larger than themselves. As the sun sets over another harvest, The elderly farmer from the beginning of our story watches his grandson lock the doors of a small food processing workshop built beside the family's fields. Tomorrow, another shipment will leave their village, but this time, it will carry more than crops. It will carry local skill, local effort, local ambition, and perhaps a little more hope than it did yesterday. Maybe that is the real harvest Burkina Faso is trying to grow. Not only stronger farms, not only stronger businesses, but stronger confidence that prosperity can be created, protected, and shared by the people who call this land home. The road ahead will not be simple. There will be setbacks, hard choices, unexpected challenges. Every nation pursuing structural reform experiences them, but the direction of travel may prove just as important as the speed, because when people begin believing that wealth is created through knowledge, enterprise, and value added, not simply through what is taken from the ground, they also begin believing that their future can be shaped by their own hands. And that may be the most powerful reform of all. If this story gave you a new perspective, tell us where you're watching from and what kind of future you hope Africa can build in the decades ahead. Your experience, your ideas, and your voice are part of this conversation. Because the story of Africa's future will never be written by one leader alone. It will be written by millions of people who decide that tomorrow can look different from yesterday. And perhaps that is where every lasting transformation truly begins.